George Harrison, popularly known as the Quiet Beatle, gave us quite a show after he quit the band. He became famous as the lead guitarist of the band, and he was also the youngest member of the band. It was said that he was bossed around a lot because he was the youngest. Being the first to leave the band, he went ahead to achieve singular success as a songwriter and performer. Did he achieve all that fame without throwing subtle shade at the band? Did he write a diss track to the pioneers of the group, Paul and John? We'll dive right into this detail, but before we do so, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more exclusive content on the Beatles. George Harrison can best be described as a talented musician. He was known as the Quiet Beatle because of the aura he would usually bring. He had always been used to the quiet kind of lifestyle. Harrison was born the youngest of 4 children in a working-class family. His father was a steward in the Merchant Navy before becoming a bus conductor, and his mother was a clerk in a grocery store. Harrison began music in secondary school before meeting the band and delving into music fully. His style of music was top-notch and scintillating. George gave us everything from love ballads to hymns to funk jams. Despite this, it seemed like his musical talent wasn't always appreciated by his fellow Beatles, especially the heads. The lead guitarist always felt devalued by his teammates. He felt his efforts were not being appreciated enough even after inputting in most of their hit songs. Harrison began to play guitar in secondary school. It was along the line he later met Paul McCartney, who invited Harrison to join the Quarrymen, the rock band he and John Lennon had formed. The group underwent several names and lineup changes before becoming the Beatles and settling on Harrison as lead guitar, Lennon as vocalist and rhythm guitar, McCartney as vocalist and bass, and Ringo Starr as drummer. Although most of the songs the Beatles performed were written by Lennon and McCartney, George also contributed original works to their collection. Let's start with Don't Bother Me, 1963. A few of his songs later came to be regarded as some of the Beatles' finest, including While My Guitar Gently Weeps, 1968, Here Comes the Sun, 1969, and Something, 1969. In 1965, Harrison studied the sitar with Ravi Shankar and first featured his skills in Norwegian Wood, 1965. Harrison's interest in Indian culture grew, and in 1968, he and the Beatles, as well as several other celebrities, explored transcendental meditation with a Maharishi Mahesh Yogi in India. The trip influenced dozens of subsequent Beatles songs, but Harrison was the only member to make these religious practices part of his life. Harrison has won awards both as a recording artist and for his work in film. He has had a total of about 9 nominations and 10 awards. Nonetheless, his influence on the group and rock music in general was profound. Harrison's use of the sitar on the 1965 track Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, introduced the instrument to Western popular culture. Along with other Harrison innovations, such as the backward guitar solo, I'm Only Sleeping, it became a defining feature of psychedelic rock. Harrison contributed several new songs to the band during their 1969 sessions for Getting Back, the album that would become Let It Be. Things weren't cordial between George and John either. On January 10, 1969, the two came to blows. Although the details of the argument aren't known, they must have been serious. George was so upset, he left the Beatles. John tried to proceed with the Let It Be session unaffected, but he was secretly very worried George had left the band for good. Harrison explained in an interview that Paul was becoming selfish. He said, "Then Paul couldn't see beyond himself. He was on a roll, but in his mind, everything that was going on around him was just there to accompany him." Harrison went on to say that McCartney was not sensitive to stepping on other people's egos or feelings during their creative process. He could not take it anymore. George had to leave the band. He later confessed it felt like the band was suffocating him. Bob Dylan once claimed his friend George Harrison, George got stuck with being the Beatle that had to fight to get songs on records because of Lennon and McCartney. Well, who wouldn't get stuck? If George had his group and was writing his songs back then, he'd have probably been just as big as anybody. Harrison puts this theory to the test when he released his groundbreaking album, All Things Must Pass, which garnered huge critical acclaim. After leaving the Beatles, Harrison released his first solo work in 1968 with the soundtrack to the psychedelic film Wonderwall. Following the breakup of the Beatles in 1970, he continued to put out solo recordings, notably the highly successful triple album All Things Must Pass, which included the memorable My Sweet Lord. Other popular songs included Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth, on Living in the Material World, 1973, and Got My Mind Set on You on Cloud 9, 1987. In 1971, Harrison staged 2 concerts to raise money to fight starvation in Bangladesh, which later became the prototype for star-studded fundraising events. In 1979, he ventured into film production as a founder of Handmade Films. Among the company's efforts was the Monty Python film Life of Brian, 1979, Time Bandits, 1981, and Mona Lisa, 1986. Harrison was a frequent collaborator and often appeared on the albums of other former bandmates and other musicians. In the late 1980s, he recorded and performed with the Traveling Wilburys, a musical group featuring Bob Dylan, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Jeff Lynne. George was one of rock music's great artists, and like all great artists, he vented his frustrations in his art. George's anger led to the song Wah Wah. Although Wah Wah is an oddly titled song that languishes in obscurity, it's a fascinating artistic achievement. It also provides insight into George's frame of mind as his band was falling apart. George was mostly known for his folk ditties, but he could also make awesome hard rock songs when he wanted to. Wah Wah has a driving beat worthy of the Beatles' best hard rock songs like Helter Skelter and Revolution. Like a lot of great hard rock songs, Wah Wah has lyrics that are difficult to decipher. All Music says the song is nonsense. The song repeatedly references wah wah and lines like, "Now I don't need no wah wahs, and I know how sweet my life can be if I keep myself free of wah wah." It's never explained what wah wah is supposed to be, but All Music contends it could be interpreted as symbolizing anything that one feels he needs to get by in life, be it a drug, religion, etc. George eventually commented on the meaning of the track. He said its message is, "You're giving me a bloody headache." Although it might seem nonsensical at first glance, Wah Wah is George's critique of how Paul and John treated him. Some lyrics of the track discuss emotional pain. "Oh, you don't see me crying? Hey baby, you don't hear me sighing." If the term wah wah represents some sort of mistreatment, it's easy to decode the lines like, "You made me such a big star, being there at the right time, cheaper than dime. Wah wah, you're giving me your wah 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 wah." Another song off the album that felt like a diss was Run of the Mill, a song aimed squarely at Paul McCartney. Harrison told the Beatles' publisher in 1979 that he had grown tired of Paul McCartney around the time he wrote the song and felt he was going around the Apple offices saying, "You're no good. Everybody was just incompetent." It was that period, the problem of partnerships. It pushed Harrison to pen the song. Lyrically, the song is as strong as anything he wrote for the Beatles. Harrison starts singing about choices being made and when to and not to raise their voices. In the chorus section, he then ponders how no one around you can carry the blame for you. Then the track moves from being theorized and is pointed directly at McCartney. Considering Harrison had maintained strong friendships with Lennon and Ringo Starr when he sings How I Lost Your Friendship, it can only mean it's about Maka. He even answers the question too, "I see it in your eyes. Though I'm beside you, I can't carry the blame for you." The song goes down as one of Harrison's most pointed tracks. More often than not, Harrison was concerned with spirituality and internal struggles, but on this track, he chose to put his feelings on the canvas and aimed one directly at McCartney. George Harrison was always at odds with Paul and John Lennon while they were bandmates. He did well as a solo artist. He got to release many solo records, but he was known for his love of collaboration. In 1988, he formed a supergroup, the Traveling Wilburys, with Jeff Lynne, Roy Orbison, Tom Petty, and Bob Dylan. He befriended the surrealist comedy troupe Monty Python, mortgaging his home to finance their iconic film, Life of Brian, and remained close with Clapton even after Pattie Boyd left Harrison for him. One of the Pythons, Eric Idle, described Harrison as one of the few morally good people that rock and roll had produced. Well after the murder of Lennon in 1980, Harrison maintained a low public profile. He was attacked in his home by an intruder in 1999, but survived with multiple stab wounds. Harrison was also treated for throat cancer in 1997, and lung cancer and a brain tumor in 2001. Harrison died at the age of 58 that year from throat cancer. Even though Paul and George were always at loggerheads, luckily, the two became close friends again before Harrison's tragic death in 2001. That's all for today's video, guys, but before we end, what do you think about George Harrison throwing subtle shades at his bandmates via songs? Do you think he was looked down on in the band? What other Harrison songs do you feel were diss tracks to John Lennon and Paul McCartney? Let us know what you think in the comment section below. And if by now you haven't, ensure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new updates about the Beatles.